It was a stormy night when I first experienced something that I can never forget. I was staying alone in a small apartment, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The wind howled through the cracks in the window, and the rain pounded on the roof. It was one of those nights where everything feels a little too quiet, a little too still. The only sound you could hear was the tapping of rain against the windows. I had just finished my work for the day and decided to relax with a book. I remember feeling exhausted, yet there was something in the air, something that didn't feel right. As I sat there, reading by the dim light of my lamp, I suddenly heard a noise, something like a soft knock at the door. It was strange, because no one had come to visit me, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, wondering if it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But then, there was another knock, louder this time. I slowly got up from my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. The hallway outside was completely empty. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the unease stayed with me. I went back to my chair, but I couldn't focus on my book anymore. Every time I heard a creak or a whisper, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. I told myself it was just the storm, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was waiting for me. The night dragged on, and I couldn't get rid of that feeling. It was as if the apartment itself had turned against me, every creak and groan of the building making me jump in fear. I tried to ignore it, but the strange feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. Then, as I sat in my chair, the lights began to flicker. At first, I thought it was a power surge from the storm, but the lights flickered again and again, until finally, they went out completely. I was sitting in complete darkness now, my heart racing. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the storm, but then I heard something. It was soft at first, like a whisper, but then it grew louder. I couldn't understand the words, but the voice sounded strange. It wasn't like a human voice. It was more like a soft rasping, as if something was trying to speak, but couldn't quite form words. My eyes strained to see anything in the dark, but I couldn't make out anything at all. Then, out of nowhere, the voice stopped. I sat there in the silence, wondering if I had imagined it. But before I could even convince myself, the sound came again, this time closer. It was as if something was moving in the darkness, something that I couldn't see but could feel getting nearer. I froze in terror. My whole body was shaking, but I couldn't move. The voice was almost right next to me now, and I could hear it clearer than before. It was saying something, but it wasn't in a language I recognized. The fear was so intense that I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out of my mouth. My legs were like jelly, and my body felt heavy as if something invisible was weighing me down. I sat there, completely frozen, the voice growing louder, closer. Then, as if out of nowhere, the lights flickered back on. The apartment was suddenly flooded with light. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of movement, anything that could explain what had just happened, but everything was still. I quickly grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and called a friend. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could tell me I was just imagining things. The phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. I left a message, asking them to call me back. But then, a new noise made my blood run cold. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from the hallway outside my apartment. I quickly stood up and ran to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and then I heard a voice this time. It was definitely a person speaking, but the voice wasn't friendly. It sounded like a warning, like someone was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand the words. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The footsteps outside my door had stopped, but the eerie silence that followed felt even worse. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. I couldn't figure out what to do next. Should I open the door and confront whatever was out there? Or should I hide, hoping it would go away? I decided to stay where I was, not moving a muscle. I leaned against the door, holding my breath, waiting for any sign of movement. And then, I heard it again, the faint sound of footsteps. But this time, it wasn't just in the hallway. It was inside my apartment. I felt my stomach drop. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone again. But before I could dial, I heard the sound of something scraping against the floor, dragging slowly and deliberately, as though something or someone was moving toward me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I was in complete darkness, alone, and whatever this was didn't seem to care. The scraping sound continued, and the air in the room felt thick, suffocating. It was as if the apartment itself was alive, closing in on me. I couldn't take it any longer. I grabbed the doorknob, twisting it with all my strength. But when I tried to pull the door open, it wouldn't budge. It was locked, just like it always was. My panic started to rise again. Why wouldn't the door open? I stepped back, trembling. That's when I heard a soft whisper. This time, the words were clearer. "Let me in." The whispering voice sent chills down my spine. "Let me in." I could feel the coldness of the words even though I was still trapped in the warmth of my apartment. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Who or what was out there? I stepped back from the door, every nerve in my body screaming to run, but my legs felt frozen. I tried to focus, taking deep breaths to calm myself. But then, the scraping sound returned, louder this time. It was as if something was dragging itself across the floor, getting closer and closer. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I instinctively moved away from the door, trying to put as much space between myself and whatever was on the other side. I had to get out. But how? The only way out was through that door, and something or someone was blocking it. I searched the apartment desperately, looking for a way to escape, but everything seemed to close in around me. My phone was still in my hand, but there was no signal, no connection to the outside world. The storm outside had knocked out the power, and now it felt like the world itself had turned against me. The scraping grew louder, almost as if whatever was outside the door was trying to claw its way in. Panic surged through me, and I ran to the window, but it was locked. The storm raged outside, the rain pounding against the glass. I couldn't see anything beyond the darkness. Then I heard it again, the voice whispering, "Let me in. I know you're in there." I stepped back in fear. Who was it? What did they want from me? I couldn't breathe. The voice was too close now, too real, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The words echoed in my mind, "Let me in. I know you're in there." My hands shook as I searched the apartment for a way out, but I was trapped. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The scraping sound outside the door had stopped for a moment, but the silence was even worse. I slowly turned to face the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, without warning, the door rattled. It was like something was pushing against it from the other side. My breath hitched as I pressed my back against the wall, wishing I could just disappear. But I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just stay there and wait for whatever was out there to break in. I looked around again, but there was nothing. The room felt suffocating, like the air itself was thick with dread. My phone still had no signal, and I didn't know who to call. I was completely alone. The door rattled again, this time more violently. I heard the unmistakable sound of something dragging, something heavy, scraping against the wood of the door frame. It was as though the thing on the other side was trying to get in by sheer force. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, my pulse racing. I stood there in the dark, my hands trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. It felt like hours passed, though it was only minutes. The silence was unbearable. Then, from behind the bathroom door, I heard a soft whisper, this time, right next to me. "You can't hide." The whisper was so close, I could feel it brushing against my ear. "You can't hide." My body went numb, every muscle tensed with fear. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The air around me felt thick and cold, as if something was hovering just behind me, waiting for me to make a sound, a move, anything. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. My mind raced as I struggled to figure out what was happening. What was in the apartment with me? Was it real? Was I losing my mind? The silence that followed the whisper was deafening. I dared not move, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that it seemed to echo in the small bathroom. And then, there it was again, the sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming closer to the bathroom door. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped just outside, and then I heard a tapping. It was light at first, almost like fingernails tapping against the door. But then it grew louder, faster, as though whatever was outside was becoming frustrated. "Let me in ... The voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear it clearly now, and it sounded like it was coming from just the other side of the door. It wasn't a human voice, it was something darker, something unnatural. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to escape. But how? There was nowhere to run. The window? No, it was too high up. The door? Locked. There was no escape. I grabbed my phone once more, praying for a signal, but there was still nothing. I needed help, but there was no one to call, no one to save me. And then, the tapping stopped. For a moment, everything was completely still, but the silence felt like a trap, a cruel, waiting silence. The silence was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like forever, and I couldn't help but wonder if whatever was outside the bathroom door was just waiting for me to make the next move. My breath was shallow, my heart racing in my chest, but I didn't dare make a sound. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, to stay still. But the longer the silence dragged on, the more I felt like I was losing my mind. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it, the faintest sound. A soft, dragging noise, moving slowly across the floor, coming closer to the bathroom door. My stomach twisted in knots. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible, hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't find me. I tried to focus, telling myself that I had to stay calm, that I could make it through this. But the sound was getting louder, the scraping, dragging noise growing closer and closer. It wasn't just one thing moving, it sounded like something more ... Something multiple, like footsteps, and something else. Something dragging along the floor. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to escape. Should I try to break the window and jump? But no, the storm outside was fierce, and I would never survive that fall. My only option was to stay hidden, to hope whatever was out there would leave. But just as I thought that, the door handle twisted. I froze. It turned again, slowly, as if something or someone on the other side was testing it. Then it started to rattle. Louder this time. The door was shaking, as if it were going to break open at any moment. I gripped my phone tightly in my hands, praying for a signal, but it remained dead. I had no choice but to brace myself. I backed into the corner, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for whatever was next. The rattling stopped suddenly, and I thought, for a brief moment, that maybe it was over. But that hope quickly shattered when I heard a voice. Not from behind the door this time, but from inside the bathroom with me ... I could feel my heart stop for a moment when I heard the voice from inside the bathroom. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to send waves of fear crashing over me. It was soft at first, almost a whisper, but the words made my blood run cold. "You can't escape." My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. Was it in my head? Was it in the walls? It sounded like it was all around me, like the very air in the room was speaking to me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end ... I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. The fear kept me frozen, my eyes glued to the bathroom door. I knew I couldn't leave through the door, but the window was still an option. Maybe I could break it, climb out, and a loud crash interrupted my thoughts. My head snapped toward the noise. The mirror above the sink shattered, I didn't see anything move, but I heard the glass fall to the floor in sharp, jagged pieces. For a split second, I wondered if I was losing my mind. The storm outside, the stress, the terror, it was all too much. But then I heard it again, this time more clearly than ever before. I'm already inside. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My mind was screaming, telling me to get out, to do something, but my body was paralyzed. I glanced down at the shattered mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, I saw the outline of a figure, standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Nothing at all. The figure was still there in the mirror. It was tall, shadowy, with glowing eyes staring right at me. You're mine now. I couldn't breathe. The figure in the mirror was still there, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. I felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to tear my gaze away. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I felt trapped, like the figure was pulling me in, holding me in place with some kind of invisible force. I slowly turned around, hoping that when I faced the room, the figure would disappear. But it didn't. It stayed in the mirror, its dark shape towering over me. I could feel its presence behind me, though I couldn't see it directly. The weight of it was suffocating, pressing down on me like a heavy hand on my chest. I took a step back, my legs trembling. The glass from the broken mirror crunched beneath my feet, but I barely noticed it. My entire focus was on that figure, on the cold, empty eyes staring at me. And then I heard the voice again. It was no longer a whisper. It was clear and sharp, like it was coming directly from the figure in the mirror. You're not leaving. I backed away from the mirror slowly, my heart pounding. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. How was this possible? How could the figure be in the mirror and not in the room with me? Was it real, or was I losing my mind? I reached for the bathroom door handle, hoping I could somehow escape. But before I could even touch it, I heard the unmistakable sound of something shifting, something moving behind me. I turned around, but there was still nothing there. The figure in the mirror was no longer standing still. It was moving, slowly, toward me. The shadowy shape in the reflection began to twist, contorting in unnatural ways, like it was stretching and warping into something far worse than I could ever imagine. I wanted to scream, to break the mirror, but my body wouldn't move. The figure was getting closer, its eyes still glowing, its shadow growing longer as it reached out for me. It's too late. Do you think I escaped? What happened next? Leave a comment, and I'll continue the story in the next session. The figure in the mirror was almost right behind me now, and I could feel it, its presence pressing against me, suffocating me. The words it spoke, "It's too late," repeated in my mind over and over again, like a chilling mantra that wouldn't stop. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath quick and shallow. I had to get out, but how? I tried to move, to break free from the paralyzing fear, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if the figure was controlling me, its dark energy locking me in place. My mind screamed for me to escape, to run out of the bathroom, but the terror kept me frozen. I could barely think. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just a shadow. It was growing, taking shape, becoming more solid, more real. I saw its hands long, clawed fingers stretching toward me. They were inches from my shoulder, reaching for me, and I could feel the coldness of its touch. Even though it wasn't physically there, I turned to face the mirror, my heart racing. The reflection of the figure was closer now, so close that I could almost feel its breath on my skin. It was smiling, or at least, it looked like it was. Its mouth was wide open, full of sharp, twisted teeth that gleamed in the dim light of the bathroom. It reached out for me. And that's when I finally broke free from the trance. I screamed, a raw, terrified scream that felt like it was tearing through my chest. I slammed my hand against the mirror, desperate to shatter it, to stop whatever was happening. The mirror didn't break. Instead, The force of my hand against it seemed to pull me forward, pulling me into the reflection. I tried to pull back, to run away, but it was too late. The mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore, it had become a portal. The dark figure's eyes locked onto mine as it dragged me closer. My body was no longer in control. It was like I was being pulled by invisible strings, forced toward the mirror. I fought with everything I had, trying to break free, but the figure's cold grip tightened around me. It was too late. Want to know what happened next? Leave a comment, and I'll tell you the rest of the story in the final session. As the figure's grip tightened around me, my entire body went cold. I was no longer in control. The mirror had become a dark abyss, pulling me in, and I felt myself slipping, my body being sucked into the reflection. My scream echoed around me, but the figure was still smiling, its twisted face growing larger as I was dragged closer. I clawed at the mirror, my fingers scraping against the glass, trying to pull myself back, but it was no use. The darkness was swallowing me whole, and the figure's cold, clawed hands were like iron, keeping me locked in place. Every part of me screamed to escape, but it was like my body didn't exist anymore. I was no longer in the bathroom. I was trapped in the reflection, in that dark, terrifying world that had consumed me. The figure leaned closer, its glowing eyes now inches from mine. I could feel the chill of its breath, and I realized that, whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a shadow. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting, watching, and now it had me. Then, in an instant, the reflection shifted. The figure was me. I saw myself, but distorted, twisted into something unrecognizable. My eyes were wide with fear, my face contorted in agony, and the smile, that same terrible smile, was on my face now. But it wasn't me smiling. It was the figure, taking over, claiming my soul. The last thing I remember is the feeling of my body fading, my consciousness slipping away as I was pulled deeper into the darkness. I woke up hours later at least, I thought I did. But when I looked around, I realized that nothing was the same. I was back in the apartment, back in the bathroom, but something was off. The air felt heavier, the walls seemed closer. And when I looked in the mirror again, I didn't recognize the face staring back at me. It was me, but it wasn't. The figure was still there, hidden behind my own eyes, waiting. And that's when I realized I was never meant to leave. It had claimed me. So, what do you think? What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment and share your thoughts on this terrifying journey.